Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα σας και πάλι και καλώς ήρθατε στο δεύτερο μέρος της απόψινής εκδήλωσης της Ένωσης Ποντιακής Νεολαίας Αττικής στο πλαίσιο των εκδηλώσεων μνήμης για την 101η επέτειο από τη γενοκτονία των Ελλήνων του Πόντου. Στο προηγούμενο μέρος παρακολουθήσαμε το χαιρετισμό της Αρμενικής Νεολαίας Ελλάδος, καθώς και το πρώτο από τα δύο βίντεο που ετοίμασε για μας ο Καρλ Βίλκενς σχετικά με τη γενοκτονία στη Ρουάντα το 1994. Θέλουμε να τον ευχαριστήσουμε ολόθερμα για την υποθυμία που επέδειξε για την πραγμάτωση αυτού του εγχειρήματος και τη σπουδαία παρακαταθήκη που αφήνει στην ελληνική κοινή γνώμη μέσα από τα βίντεο αυτά. Με τον ίδιο τρόπο θα σας αποχαιρετήσουμε και σήμερα με το δεύτερο βίντεο του κ. Wilkins, στο οποίο μοιράζεται μαζί μας τις σκέψεις του για το τι συνέβη μετά τη γενοκτονία στη Ρουάντα και τους τρόπους που μπορεί να επιτευχθεί οριστική συμφιλίωση και επούλωση του τραυμάτου του παρελθόντος.
I just wanted to say what an honor it is to be part of this commemoration of the genocide against the Greeks of Pontus. I want to thank you for the education work that you're doing. I know that when Teresa and I were with you in December, we were just really moved by the work of surviving generations and helping us understand what our shared humanity looks like, how our destinies are inextricably linked all around the globe, and what we can do to build a spirit of collaboration and harmony. So thanks once again. It's good to be with you, even via video conference, and I wish you all the best. My wife and I moved to Rwanda in the spring of 1990. We were in this beautiful country from 90 to 96, partnering with the Rwandan people in the area of healthcare and education. Then when the genocide against the Tutsi, 1994 genocide against the Tutsi came, we decided that she would take our children to safety and I would stay and try to help. Working with Rwandan colleagues, we actually ended up bringing water, food, medicine to orphans that were trapped around the city. These days, I have the privilege of bringing teachers back to Rwanda. And they see for themselves how the genocide is not a story of one group hating another group, but it's the story of political manipulation of the basic needs of ordinary people. Political manipulation causing the death of more than 1 million people. And I tell the teachers right at the beginning, this story could destroy us. Our best defense is this idea of finding the good. Finding the good. That's what we're going to explore here today as we look at how Rwanda is putting the pieces back together after that horrific genocide of 26 years ago now. We're going to look primarily at the idea of rebuilding trust, and the key tool we're going to look at in rebuilding trust is the art of reframing. How do we reframe the other? How do we reframe ourselves? How do we reframe situations? And I just love the different lessons we learn every time we go back in Rwanda, to ask the deeper why, to replace judgment with curiosity. There's so many tools in this journey of putting the things back together, and I'm really excited about the stories. In fact, the one story, we're going to leave the beautiful city of Kigali behind here. I never get tired. I mean, the gorgeous skyscapes. We're going to leave this city behind. We're going to go out in the countryside. We're going to meet up with a group of men and women at this community center. Some who are survivors of the genocide, some who perpetrated the genocide, some who stood by. And we're going to learn their stories. You know, it's in listening to people's stories that we begin to think about our own stories and we think about our own values. For me, coming from Rwanda, I've really honed in on these three values of respect, empathy, and inclusion. We have an environment where we can learn each other's stories, the respectful environment. Then as we learn the stories, we start connecting the dots and empathy grows. And then we're like, hey, inclusion, why don't you come home? We're having a barbecue. I want you to meet my wife. I think we all hunger. We all feel a deep need for purpose and for community. So in the story we're going to explore today, we'll be looking not only at those values and that concept of purpose and community, but we're going to be looking at other lessons that the people of Rwanda teach, or I've learned from them. We're going to be meeting Maria in particular and Filbert, Maria, who survived the horrors of the genocide with her daughter, her husband and sons, didn't survive. And she introduced us to Filbert as an incredibly valuable family friend. She says he does stuff for me like my sons would have done, you know. She helping in the garden, and she says he does it willingly. I like that she added that. However, we're going to back up. That's how Maria would introduce us to Filbert today. But in 1994, Filbert was involved in killing. In fact, he was in the gang that killed Maria's husband and sons. Now, I hesitate in telling this story in such a short period of time, and I know it's traumatic, it's dramatic, it's sensational. I'm not trying to add any of that. I didn't want to tell you first off that he was involved with killing, because that's how I heard the story, and it fired pathways in my brain that really made it hard for me to listen to any more of the story. I told you initially that he's a family friend, just in hopes of a slight advantage. But now that I have told you, in listening and hearing the story and not being blocked like I was, in effect, I was stuck in 1994. No, I have told you what he did in 94, but let's look at the journey from 94 to this was 2019. And we're going to look at the three programs, key programs that the government of Rwanda has put in place for the restorative journey, for this putting things back together, for rebuilding trust. The first one, Gacaca, there were thousands and thousands of people accused of killing their neighbors, way too many to have the traditional or conventional, modern day trials. They reached way back in their history to this idea of Gacaca. And without going into a lot of detail, in a nutshell, Gacaca was about truth-telling from my perspective. The people in the community would pick 7 people, men and women that they trusted. The little sash they're wearing would say, person of integrity. Man, integrity, what we believe and what we do, matching, so important. Men and women of integrity. And say, much of the time I heard Thursday afternoon, close school, close shops, everybody, let's go to the soccer field. And we'll hear the people confess. The prisoners will come out, in their pink uniform. The community will be all around. After they confess, the community can ask them questions. You see, for many people, say Maria, for example, she didn't know where her husband and sons were buried. And you have all of these unknowns in your mind. And it's hard to, if not impossible, to process unknowns. But we're story people, we're story creatures, we think in stories. And so when we don't know all the facts, we fill in our imagination, we fill in with what if scenarios. At Gacaca, people could learn the truth. They could actually, you might even wonder if your family, if you don't know where they're buried, are they really dead? Might be irrational, but filling in the gaps, unknown gaps of stories isn't always controlled by rational thinking. And so Filbert confessed. After Gacaca, where people learn the truth and they can then begin to process, you keep seeing me grabbing like the side of my head. I think about all of our imaginings, but now that we know the truth, the imaginings can slow down and we can begin to accept, which is huge. Accept, and then what will I do with what I've accepted? Following Gacaca, people would go to a TIG camp, TIG, French abbreviation, work in the interest of the general public, and they would reinvent themselves. This story of men and women coming back into the community, no fence, no walls. Restorative justice is about everybody buying into the story, everybody being part of finding the solution for the harm that was caused. And these men and women will build roads, dirt roads, maybe, bridges made out of logs. And if you don't have a road near your house, say you've got to put your cabbage on the back of your bicycle and push it a kilometer to the nearest road. When somebody brings a new road, even if it's dirt, near your house, it changes your life. These people who have confessed, and by the way, this isn't the top level people who organized the genocide or the mid-level people in executing the genocide. These are the ordinary citizens, civilians, who were manipulated. And I know that sounds it is oversimplifying, but for the purpose of this conversation, just to get started, that's the one factor we're going to look at in why people did what they did. We're going to look at the manipulation and fear factor. At least that's the one I'm going to reference. And these people on the weekend, they could go to a local church if they wanted to, put on civilian clothes. And this is where it gets, for me, really, and well, the whole thing's interesting. Gacaca is interesting. But imagine you're in church and somebody from the local TEAJ camp, Reinvent Yourself camp, comes to church. And it's song service. And you hear them sing, and they're really good singers. After church, when you're talking to your friend, do you say, did you see that person from the, and do you call it a killer camp? Because that's impacting our thinking. Or do we call it a Reinvent Yourself camp? Or do you say, hey, did you hear that singer? Man, I wonder if we could get him in the choir. See, this idea of finding the good is so crucial in reinventing, reframing the other, reframing ourselves, reframing situations. From TEAJ camp, people would go back home. Oh yeah, by the way, TEAJ camp, this idea of reinventing yourself, definitely about stopping one thing thinking. When we define people by one thing, we're stuck often. The restorative journey gets stuck when we only see ourselves as one thing. You see, it's not just reinventing the people who did harm in the eyes of the community. It's also reinventing the people who did harm in their eyes. So this idea of one thing thinking and guarding against dividing people, this unidimensional, I only see them one way. That's one of the big gifts of Gacaca, beginning to change one thing thinking. The TEAJ camp, another step in changing one thing thinking. And then when they come home, this whole thing of one thing thinking, okay, I got to get into this just for a minute, huh? They say that we store information in these synapses, neural pathways. And so they come into church, somebody who did harm, and we fire a pathway. Hey, they're from the camp of people who did harm. Or after church, we could fire a pathway. I wonder how many people they killed. Or we could say, I wonder if we could get them to join the choir. You see, they say that the more we fire pathways, the stronger the coating on the outside, the myelin sheath, the quicker it will come next time. So when I'm doing finding the good pathways, then I'm more likely to say, wonder if they'd like to join the choir. So the last step here that we're looking at is coming home. And what I like to look at through the lens of shared experiences. And back to Maria and Filbert, in that little community setting, they had been involved in building homes, adobe bricks. You're down here in the pit, you're stomping the mud. And Maria says, man, I didn't want to be anywhere near Filbert during this process. And Filbert too, really awkward to be near Maria. I want you to step into this muddy pit with me for a minute and say you're in there and maybe you survived the genocide. You're stomping around in this pit and another guy comes in who was just released from prison. And he's also working there in the pit right next to you. You have a choice to make. What pathways are going to fire in your head? I have to confess, some of my first pathways I might fire is, just my luck. In the rotation, all these people, I end up in the pit with the killer. And a pathway like that could easily lead me to another pathway firing in my brain. They should have locked them up and thrown the key away. You follow that pathway, I'm actually on a pathway to harm here. Or I employ this practice of finding the good. I've been looking for finding the good in the weather, in people, in my family members. This whole idea of finding the good, developing those pathways, those new pathways, finding the good. And when the guy climbs in the pit with me, I'm like, hey, I'm glad he's here. Man, this is hard work. We can use all the help we can get. And the next pathway that I might fire could be, I wonder how his kids are coping, huh? He just got out of prison. I wonder how his kids are coping. That, to me, glad you're here. We can use all the help we get. I wonder how your kids are coping. That, to me, is a pathway to healing. This is a little drawing that just really helps me, more for self-reflection, not to kind of apply it to somebody else and say, oh, you're polarizing. Oh, no, you're restorative. It's to ask myself questions. The deeper why, when I have these pathways of judgment that fire so quickly, what about the pathways of curiosity? On the pathway to harm, when we have more time to talk about this subject, we talk about polarizing vocabulary, polarizing thinking, polarizing action. Just my luck. Ended up in the pit with a killer, Should have locked him up and thrown the key away. Nothing to feel ashamed of those kind of thoughts. For me, though, those kind of thoughts kept me trapped in 1994. They trap me in a vicious cycle that takes me deeper and deeper into harm. Whereas when I start thinking restorative thoughts, man, glad you're here, can use all the help. Wonder how his kids are coping. I'm on this pathway to healing. Maria and Filbert's story is so, oh my goodness, there is just so much to unpack in this story. Maria is such a leader to me. She's like, it's possible not to be controlled by your past, to be defined by your past. It's like she's saying, there's light at the end of the tunnel, It's possible to get free from anger and bitterness. And for Maria, she would tell you with Filbert, she began to get free when she learned where her husband and sons were buried. She actually gives Filbert credit for her journey out of anger and bitterness. Her journey to healing, she gives credit to Filbert, which that really messed with pathways in my mind when I first heard it, because I'm like, no, he's the cause of all the problems. He is the blame. One thing thinking, This reframing and neural pathways, Maria has done an incredible job of building new pathways, of reframing situations. And Filbert has played a key role in that. Filbert apologized again and again. I have to confess, when I first heard that he apologized again and again, my first thought was, okay, once is enough, now leave her alone. Those were my pathways at that time. But Filbert was on a journey of healing, and he felt compelled not only to apologize again and again and to help in any way he could, but he went after the ones who were also in the gang who killed Maria's husband and sons until they agreed to confess and then even apologize. I am slowly, as I heard those stories, as I heard how Filbert had to go against death threats from other prisoners. Don't you confess. We'll get your family, because that will implicate us. As I learned more of Filbert's story, and he was not so unidimensional for me, one thing, I started having different curiosity instead of judgment with Filbert. There's one other part here to this story. I got to tell you this part. Maria and her daughter, when her daughter got married, they invited Filbert to the wedding. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. There must have been some other family, hopefully, who survived. They don't want to be at the wedding with this guy. I'm just kind of thinking that way. And I said to Maria, didn't some of your family get angry? Okay, full disclosure, she didn't just invite Filbert to the wedding, She had so reframed neural pathways. Maria asked Filbert to be the MC, front and center at the wedding. So back here, you get what I'm talking about? Who's in the center? Maria put Filbert in the center. And for some of us, especially just hearing this story in a few minutes, it's like, that's going too far. That's judgment from me when I was thinking that. That's not curiosity. That's judgment. And fortunately, I had a tiny bit of curiosity, although it was born out of judgment. And that curiosity was, didn't it make your family angry? And she said, yeah, it did. But she says, you know what? When Filbert asked my daughter to be the godmother of his children, it made his family angry too. And I thought to myself, Maria's a master. I put her in the center, like the center of the universe. Didn't it make your family angry, And she goes, yeah. But then she deftly steps out of the center and she puts Filbert in the center. And she says, but it made his family angry too when he asked my daughter to be the godmother to his parents. These are all just some really incredible tools to me, and the more we talk, the more we begin to understand how there's connections between one thing thinking and who's in the center. When I am angry, frustrated, fearful, often I'm in the center and I'm consumed with one thing thinking. So I kind of feel like we're just beginning to explore and unpack some of these things, but I want to just wrap it with a thought from some of the ladies of the community there. When we asked them, how do you survive? How have you survived these 20-some years with all of the horrible memories and trauma and tragedy? And the ladies blew me away. They said, it's love. Now, I know that sounds, like really like a cliche or something, kind of pie in the sky. But as I thought more about it, they said it's our pain that drives us deeper into love. It's like we're drowning. This pain could drown us, and the lifeboat, what's saving us is love, a radical love that reframes the other, that does acts of kindness, respect, empathy, and inclusion to the other. I am constantly challenged every time I go back to Rwanda. It's no more fear of going back and trauma, like the initial visits were pretty traumatic. Now I go back to Rwanda with eagerness and excitement to see what else we're going to learn, and then come back and make these little drawings and stuff. We're never one thing, good or bad. That's often we think, and it's a good guy, bad guy. We're a mixed from day one, but we are one thing. We're a human, all of us human. A human who has choices. At times they may be limited, but we always have choices. And for me, from the people of Rwanda, I've made the choice to ask the deeper why, to replace judgment with curiosity, and to find the good. Thanks so much. If you have questions or anything, you can find me, my wife, our website, World Outside My Shoes, or you look for the American who stayed in Rwanda during the genocide, and you'll find some of those things. But I hope we can cross paths one day and meet up in person when this COVID virus business is all done and we come out the other side more human.